are celebrating our sesquicentennial, our 150th anniversary as a church. And it's just kind of hard to believe that it's been this long. I was here for the 125th. Dr. Paige Patterson, who was the president of Southeastern Seminary, now retired, was our speaker. And we had a great celebration that day. In the old auditorium, Ray said that it seated 500 people. They were very friendly people. Put 500 people in there. About 350 was pretty full feeling. And we filled it up that day. And I'm glad to be able to be here for 2 substantial anniversary celebrations. It's wonderful. Now, this is our sesquicentennial, but it's also the beginning of 2020 vision. So once again, we're raising money. It was interesting to hear the history of our church as Ray gave it a while ago, and notice how many times in 150 years we were raising money. It's so funny. It really is. So yes, we're doing it again with 2020 vision. I'm not talking about financial things today, but it is the beginning of it, because we're looking back to see what God has done, looking forward to see what God will do. And we have all events planned for the entire month. The fair we're having just a few weeks on the 20th is part of 2020 Vision, because we want everybody not just to give their resources, financial resources, but also we want you to give your life to serve. And so the fair will be helping you find a place to serve and work. And remember, on the 27th, we're having a joint service again. This time, we'll be joined by our West Portsmouth campus. So everybody at that campus, they're meeting right now for worship. We'll come over and they'll be here with us in this place. And so both campuses will be together, and we'll conclude 2020 Vision with a tremendous service. In 1997, we had Cross the Jordan. Cross the Jordan was the key program that made the relocation happen. Together We Build was in 1994. It was a Southern Baptist program. We had a consultant come in from our convention, from our denomination, and he helped us raise money. But at that time, the church was divided, almost 50-50, about whether we should relocate or not. And so the commitments for that program, only a small number of our church gave to it. They gave about $500,000. But by 1997, our church had come together, and we were pretty much going in the same direction, and we had crossed the Jordan. We based what we were doing that month on the book of Joshua and what God did for the people of Israel as they passed from Egypt to the Promised Land, through the wilderness into the Promised Land. And at that time, we had committed $1.2 million. And with the sale of our former building to the Methodist Church, we were able to raise about half of the monies needed to build this building on this location. We borrowed the rest. Now, $4.4 million in 1999 is about $6.8 million now. And I want you to get what was happening. So we went from a church of about 250 in 1990 to in 9 years being able to raise through gifts and a sale of a property and through a loan, $4.4 million. That's a tremendous thing. And the backdrop of all that was this story in the book of Joshua. So what we're going to do today is turn our thoughts back to Joshua, turn our thoughts back to 1997 and 1999 and what God was teaching us then, and now in 2019 to learn from those things again. Now, I became pastor. I was a young guy, and what God told Joshua really impressed me, and it meant a lot to me. You see, Joshua was coming in after a giant, Moses, and I followed a man who was pastor for 32 years. Oh, and by the way, we've had only 2 pastors for the last 62 years. Now, that doesn't say anything about me or about Dr. Moss, it says a lot about you, that you're willing to receive leadership and support a pastor that way for so long. But anyway, I followed a giant, a man with great influence, and was well known throughout the state of Virginia. And being a young guy and following a giant, it was a difficult time, and I was greatly challenged. And I was reading Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, and God told Joshua, "As I was with Moses, I will be with you. So be strong and courageous." Now, me personally, I'm not a very courageous person. I'm kind of timid. My ideal day is to be on my porch, listening to classical music, reading. And so, I'm not the kind of guy you would normally think would take over for a giant and then try to do something like relocate and build and deal with all the opposition, all the difficulty we had. And so when I read Be Strong and Courageous, it was extremely impressive on me. And then as chapter 3 comes, the people of Israel on the banks of the Jordan River. The Jordan River is normally nothing more than a creek, but during the flood stage, when the waters from the snow melted on Mount Hermon come into the waters going north to south, the river becomes a raging torrent, several hundred feet across and very, very deep. Now, when the people of Israel came to the Red Sea, when they left Egypt 40 years before, Moses stood on a rocky outcropping and held up his staff, and the waters parted. That is a tremendous miracle. To show the people of Israel that God was with Joshua in the same way he was with Moses, he said, Joshua, listen, you take the Ark of the Covenant, this box containing the Ten Commandments and all the other memorabilia from Egypt, this box which I have given to you as my presence, and you have the priests go stand in the middle of the Jordan River, and it will part. And so Joshua, believing, sent the priests with the Ark of the Covenant into the middle of the Jordan River, and it parted. And this is pretty cool. The water from the river piled up 40 or 50 feet high at the town of Adam, about 4 miles upstream. If some guy gets up out of bed in the morning in the town of Adam and walks out of his door going, "Hey, Marge, come over here and see this." You don't see this very often. You don't see water piled up 4 stories high outside the front of your house very often. But that was the miracle. And you see, even though it wasn't the Red Sea, it was a miracle of similar consequence. What God was doing in the parting of the sea and what God was doing in the parting of the Jordan River was showing His power. And so as He was with Moses, He also was with Joshua, and He also with the peoples who went over into the Promised Land. We pick up chapter 4, and it'll be on the screens for us in just a moment. It's coming up now. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, 1 from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, 1 from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of Israel, to serve as a sign among you in the future when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones will be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And we moved down to the end of the chapter, and they are there to this day. And we moved down to the end of the chapter. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what He had done to the Red Sea when He dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, so that you might always fear the Lord your God.'" As God has done great things in the past, He will do great things in the future. The people crossed the Jordan River. God parted the waters. He had done the same thing for Moses 40 years before. Now He was doing the same thing again. It was a tremendous miracle. The stones that were taken out of the center of the river We'll usually memorialize that occasion so people in the future could say, look what God has done. Now, I have a bias. I've been here for 29 years, and so when you talk about the history of Deep Creek Baptist Church, or now DC Church, I think about the 29 years I've been here. It is one of the things that is part of the human condition that we think history begins the day we were born. So, you know, my bias is what God did when the church was built, this new location, and the money that we were raised, and the things that we did back then, and then all the growth and all the wonderful things God has done since. But you see, my life wasn't the beginning of history. It was just part of history. And our church is stretched back to 1869. And there were 17 people at the end of the Civil War that had a vision for a church in this area. And out of their vision, out of their desire, out of their hard work, out of their sacrifice and their giving, a church was founded. They built a building. They worshiped in it. The church grew. I'm very encouraged and somewhat in awe about what happened in the 1920s. When these farmers decided to build a new building because the old one was inadequate. They raised money, but the money wasn't enough, and they had to put up their own property. I mean, would you do that? I mean, you may because you love the Lord, but you'd probably be hesitant about it. Just think, taking your house, mortgaging your house, saying, I'll put that money from my mortgage up to help build this building in this place. That's what they did. And then things got so tight that they almost were foreclosed upon. Church almost went bankrupt, but because of God being there and God's working and God's miraculous power, they were able to pay the loan and keep the church moving. You know, when my wife got out of college, her first job was at Deep Creek High School, which is now the middle school. She was there for a year as a librarian. And, you know, I think that some of you have told me across the years that, oh, yeah, you remember her. You remember her. And so I would go, we only had one car, so I would leave Norview where we were living, and I would come pick her up at school, and I would get back interstate and go home. I never went any further south than Deep Creek Middle School. I didn't even know that Deep Creek Baptist Church existed. I didn't know anything about the community of Deep Creek. But, you know, on this old property on the corner of George Washington Cedar, there was a church building which I had never seen. And I didn't have any idea that 30 years later I'd be pastor. It wasn't 30 years. Let's see, I'm not that old. It was only 15 years. I'd be pastor of Deep Creek Baptist Church. And so I didn't get a chance to see and be a part of all that God was doing back then, but He was at work, and He was blessing this church. And so what He did in the 1990s wasn't a new thing. Are you listening? It was something God had been doing all through the years from our founding, and He's still working and doing those things now. So God's worked great things in the past. He's done wonderful things. Now, on a day of remembrance and some nostalgia, I want to say something which is kind of dangerous, and it's not meant to be critical. It's not meant to be. I'm just trying to express the truth. Looking back is great. Nostalgia is wonderful. But the only real benefit of the past for those of us who live in the present is it teaches us how God works and what He does for the future. The closest thing we have to eternity now in this universe is the future, because it stretches so far. Having our attention on the past and thinking about how it used to be, how wonderful things were when we were children. That's great. It really is. But its real benefit is to teach us about how God works in the future what He'll do in the years to come. Let me tell you a joke. This police officer's working the street in his patrol car, and a car goes by going 1 mile an hour. Long traffic jam behind the car. So he pulls out with his siren, pulls the car over, which wasn't very hard. It was only going 1 mile an hour. And when he got to the car, he saw that there were 4 senior ladies in the car. And the lady who was driving rolled the window down, and she said, "What is it, officer?" He said, "Well, you're driving 1 mile an hour." And she said, "I want to go in the speed limit." And she pointed out at the sign which said US 1. He says, "Man, listen, that's the road sign. You're on US 1. Speed limit's 35. And he looked in the car, and he saw the other 3 senior ladies were doing this. And she said, "Don't mind them. We just got off of I-95. I can't tell you how many times I heard over the years somebody say, "We don't want to get ahead of God." And what they were really saying was that we don't want to get ahead of me. You can go too fast, yes, but my experience has been that the people of God tend to go too slow. That God has so much more for us than what we're doing. He has so much that He wants us to accomplish that we're not accomplishing. He has so much that He wants us to do, but because it makes us uncomfortable, because we're holding back, things seem too fast, and we end up blaming God for the uncomfort that we feel. The benefit of looking past is to see what God can do. And here's the thing, as He's done great things, He did great things for Moses and the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. He did great things again for Joshua and the people as they traveled across the Jordan into the Promised Land. And by the way, we don't have the whole story here in this passage, but He gave the Promised Land city by city to the people of Israel. And what He had promised 400 years before to Abraham, He fulfilled. For what God has done in the past, He will do again. And I believe He is doing a great thing with us right now. What does the future have to hold for Deep Creek Baptist Church, the Deep Creek Baptist Church campus, for DC Church? What does the future have for us? See, what God does is God does miraculous things. He does. And you know, one of the problems in the modern day times is that we read the stories in Scripture, both skeptics and believers, and we see healings, and we see miracles of various kinds. We see waters of great bodies of water parting. And we don't see it now, and we think, well, either God doesn't do that kind of thing anymore, or it's all a story, it's all a myth. He never did do those things. Whenever we think that way, it's because we're not seeing the miracles that God is still performing. He's still performing miracles. He parted the waters. That was a great miracle. The water piled up at Adam. It was a great miracle. And I think as I look out at this church and what has happened over our 150 years, we are no more certain proof that miracles still exist than anywhere else in the world. We are a miracle. We were a miracle when those 17 people founded us. We were a miracle in the 20s when we raised the money and almost were foreclosed upon. We were a miracle when we built our buildings in the 1950s. We were a miracle when we relocated to this place and built this building. And across the years, all the people who were saved and baptized and then gone out into the world to serve in God's kingdom, all those things are proof of the miracles God is still performing. He's still doing great things. I mentioned a while ago that sometimes history makes us nostalgic. We look to the past and we wish things could be like what they used to be. And I got to tell you, now you got to remember this, things will never be the way they used to be. They never will be. And by the way, they probably never were. Our memories sometimes make things more golden than they actually were. We don't want to go back there. As Vic sang earlier, we want to go forward. Now, my little granddaughter Abigail, and by the way, my grandchildren are the most wonderful grandchildren who've ever lived. And you may disagree. That's okay. You have a right to be wrong. My little granddaughter Abigail started toddling back in May. And on Father's Day, she started toddling over and sitting down with me on the stairs. We sit on the stairs together, and we talk, and we have snacks. And she moves her feet up and down like this, you know. So I do the same thing, move my feet up and down like this. We have a fun time sitting on the stairs and talking to each other. But when she first started sitting on the stairs, she had a hard time going backwards. Now, you have to go backwards to sit down. Maybe you didn't know this. You have to go backwards to sit down. So she would be like 4 or 5 feet from the stairs, and she would start to go backwards like this. There was no beeping sound, but she did go backwards like this. And when she got to the stairs and began to sit down, about half the time, she had not backed up far enough, and she missed the stairs. Sat on the floor instead, and she had to get back up. Or she would actually miss the stairs altogether and sit on the stair rail. It was really funny. She's getting better at this now. It really was funny. I can see you laughing. But anyway. And I was thinking to myself that we Baptists have everything turned around from Abigail. We have a very easy time going backwards. We have a very hard time going forward. Do you believe that God still performs miracles? Do you believe it? All across the years of our church, He performed miracles. We thank Him. We're remembering those miracles today. And He's still doing miracles. We were able, because of God's blessing, to go to a church that had been suffering and declining for many years. And it's interesting to me, just as a sidelight, that the two largest Southern Baptist churches on High Street in Portsmouth, both at one time run 1,000 in worship. One is not there, and one merged with us. Now, that should give us some understanding of what's been happening. But when Western Branch Baptist Church merged with Dee Creek Baptist Church, and we were able to renovate their building, and now on a good Sunday they have 130 in worship. They're meeting right this moment as I'm speaking to you. Cal Myers is speaking using the same text that I'm using right now, and we decided to get together later on and have a contest to see who did a better job with it. That's a miracle. And I believe, despite every evidence that I'm seeing right now, I believe that God has another place out there that He wants us to merge with and have another campus someplace else. I believe that. Because a God who did miracles is still doing them. Now, one more thing. I know you love your church. I know you love your people. Oh, and it's interesting to see people from West Portsmouth coming over here for things and are going over there for things. That's pretty neat. I know you love your church, so don't take this as being critical, but we're just a pile of rocks. We're a pile of rocks. Now, Joshua said, and now it wasn't, it's in the text, and there's a lot of discussion among scholars about exactly what the text says. And some translations actually translate it this way. But He orders for rocks to be taken out of the Jordan River, one for each tribe. So there's 12 tribes. He asks for the leaders of the tribes to go down and get a stone, put it on their shoulder. But then He mentions that being placed in 2 different locations. Both at Gilgal, where there was a place of worship, but also in the riverbed of the Jordan River where the priests stood. And so I think what this is saying is that they made 2 piles with 24 stones. One at Gilgal and one in the middle of the Jordan River. Now, I want you to try to get this. In future years, little kids would say, Daddy, what are those stones? As they were going to worship. And Dad would say, son, daughter, those are stones from the bottom of the Jordan River. And our people crossed over when the land was dry in the middle of the river. We pulled those stones out. So in future years, we could look back and see what God had done. And I can hear skeptics say, oh, come on now. That didn't happen. Those 12 stones are just 12 rocks you got random. But then as the year went through, you had the flood stage, then you had the dry season. And the dry season, the waters would part, dry up, and you could see the 12 stones in the bottom of the river bed. So there were 12 stones here that pointed to the 12 stones there. And every time the people of Israel saw these stones, they remembered that God had done miracles for them in their life and given them a promised land and conquered it for them. That's what they saw. That's what they remembered. So the pile of rocks they saw at Gilgal, and then once a year at the bottom of the riverbed of the Jordan River, reminded them of what God had done. And that's why we're proud to be a pile of rocks. Because every time somebody drives by this building, every time somebody comes to worship here on a Sunday morning, they're seeing a people who are here because of the hand of God. We are proof of His miraculous power. We are proof that He does great things. And every year on our anniversary, my wife and I, we've been married 45 years now. Hard to believe, huh? I know. I look so good. It makes it so hard to believe. But anyway, every year on our anniversary, either before we go to Disney or after we go to Disney, we sort of like tour places that were important to us when we were dating. We go to the Pancake House at Ward's Corner, which was where our first date was. See, I was on staff at Talbot Park Baptist Church, and she went to Talbot Park Baptist Church. And I didn't actually meet her there. I met her on campus at ODU, but it just turned out we were going to the same church. And so after church one Sunday night, she had asked me out, by the way. She still says that's not true, but it's true. And we went to the Pancake House. And she said, I said, let's go inside and get some. She said, no way am I going in there. That's how it's changed. Have you all been to Ward's Corner anytime recently? It's changed a lot. And we go to the worship center, the Talbot Park's worship center, where we got married. And sometimes I get my picture in front of it. She won't do that, but I'll get my picture in front of it, and we remember what it was like that day when we got married. And for me, it's a very romantic time. I'm looking back to a great event. And then I start thinking, and we'll reminisce together about our first apartment in Norview and going to seminary at Southwestern together. We put everything we had in my dad's green Plymouth Fury 3 and drove to Fort Worth, Texas. You think about our first seminary apartment, I think that building's still there. I took a picture of it, and we look back at it and thinking about how we were living in a place that was so small that when you walk into the bedroom, you got into the bed at the same time. That's how small it was. And then we came out of seminary, and no church wanted me, and I lived in my parents' back room. We talked about this for a year as I substitute taught and played golf. Lots of golf. Our first church, Pine Chapel Baptist Church, there for 11 years. We talk about that. We talk about coming here in September of 1990, and our children being born, and the houses that we've lived in, and all the things that have happened in our marriage. It's good for us to think about that. Are you thinking about your church now? what God has done over 150 years. And every time somebody sees this church and who we are, they see a memorial to the power of the living God. We are a pile of rocks, but we're a proud pile of rocks. And I'm thinking about what God's going to do in the next 150 years with this church. I believe He's going to do some tremendous things.